name is Etta Hecht. I was born in Lithuania in the city of Kovna, October 7th, 1938. I lived with my parents. I was an only child and a grandmother, my father's mother. We lived in a little apartment while my parents both taught. They were teachers. My father was also principal of a Jewish school at the time.
My name is Ernest Paul. It was Pal in Czechoslovakia. And I was born January 14th, 1928 in Nové Selo. At that time, that part of the world was Czechoslovakia. And in Hungarian, the name of the town was Bereg Újfalu. The environment in general at home was not only friendly, but also we knew that we are Jews. The town had only about 50 Jewish families within about 5,000 people. So we were a small minority, but we kept our head high in spite of them showing anti-Semitism already in those years. When I was 10 years old, the territory of that part of the country was taken over by the Hungarian regime, the Hungarian government. We saw the handwriting on the wall. Anti-Semitism got stronger and stronger. I was a rebel at home. I didn't like what I saw and felt that if I could get out of here, I could accomplish much more than living in this town. As I got to Budapest, my cousin took me to the synagogue. In the synagogue, we met other kids of our age, and they were a part of a youth Zionist movement, Habonim. They were committed not to let the Nazis control them, and they in turn taught us self-defense and taught us how to deal with weapons and prepared us for all eventualities that possibly could come with the Nazi regime growing and getting stronger.
My name is Rella Roth. I was born 1923, August the 23rd, and I was born in Mukachevo. That time it was Czechoslovakia. Well, we were 5 children of my parents. My father managed a candle factory. My mother was managing a butcher store with the children. I was that time 13 or 14 years old. They came in on Friday, and on Friday that city, like Munkac, was very busy preparing for the Shabbat. Like the men, they went to the mikveh, you know, and they buying the challah and the fish to preparing. And the Hungarian soldiers, most of the Jewish men, they wore beards and payas. And the Hungarian soldiers came with the magnets and started to cut their hair off the face. And it just started out to be bloody.
Germans entered Lithuania, and right away they passed laws against the Jews where the Jews had to, number one, wear a yellow star, they couldn't walk on the sidewalks, they were abused. The Jews were told they had to move to a ghetto. My grandmother, my parents and I, we were in one room, another family was in the kitchen and so on. We were prisoners at that point. And then in October 1941, at 6 o'clock in the morning, trucks rolled it through the ghetto saying everybody had to leave their rooms, their house, and we had to congregate on a place in a square that was called the Makradu, meaning democracy, which is rather ironic. And they said anyone who would be fined hiding or staying in their home would be shot. And what they told us was to line up in rows of 8, and the rows had to march in front of a German Nazi who sat on a chair, and he pointed people to go to the left or to the right. And my father soon noticed that the people who were being sent to the left were old people, disabled people, and young children. So when our turn came and we were in front of this man, he pointed us to the left. My father just grabbed me, my mother, and just grabbed us over to the right. The people who were sent to the left, there were 10,000 of them, were sent to the 9th Fort, which was the killing place where they killed all these people. One of the big events that happened in the ghetto that was called the Kinderaktion, the children against like selection. And that lasted for 2 days. That was March 27th and 28th, 44 already. And what they did is they literally went from house to house looking for children. So what my parents decided to do was to hide under a stairway that led up to the 2nd floor. So we could hear the Nazis, the soldiers walking, climbing up the stairs. I could still remember those boots climbing up there. And, sorry. We could hear the screams outside because they were grabbing children and throwing them against the building and throwing them on trucks to take them away, to kill them. In April 1944, I was just 5.5 years old. My parents conceived a plan of getting me out of the ghetto. They had contacted a colleague of my father who was a Christian, also a principal of a school, and he asked him if he would take me and save my life. I spoke Yiddish at home, so now they had to teach me Lithuanian. They had about 3 weeks to prepare me, and they also basically were brainwashing me to say that I was not Jewish and never to admit that I was Jewish. And they gave me a Lithuanian name, Elenitė. And if anybody asks what happened to my parents, that I don't know. I was abandoned as a child. When they decided to get me out, smuggle me out of the ghetto, I was placed in this bag, and my mother carried me while marching with the other women to go to the place of work. The women sort of gathered around the guard to divert his attention. My mother ran out, and then she took off her star, and we walked to a little place, a meeting place. And I remember thinking how, will I ever see my mother again? And it was very hard saying goodbye. But she took me then to this family called Lazauskas. The man's name was Mr. Lazauskas. And they, in turn, had 8 children of their own, but that's where I remained during the end of the rest of the war. In the meantime, the Nazis decided to eradicate the ghetto. And what they did is burn down the ghetto. And anyone who was hiding, who was left behind, of course, obviously didn't make it. The rest of the people were sent by cattle car to concentration camps. While in the cattle car, my mother and father decided that one of them should take a chance. So my mother was afraid, and father said, okay, he'll do it. My father was hoisted up on people's shoulders, and he jumped off the train, a running train. He fell and became unconscious. After he woke up, there was someone standing over him, looking at him. And since he didn't have any ID, this person decided, someone working on the railroad decided to take him to the Gestapo. And while they were walking, and he was kind of holding on to my father, he met another worker, and he started telling him the story, how he found my father, Well, my father was able to get away from them, and he ran into the woods, and how he saved himself was basically hiding in the woods and on farms and haystacks. And when the war was over, he came for me. And I remember so distinctly the day when he came, he looked at me and he says, do you know who I am? And I was afraid. I'm still afraid. I didn't say anything. And then he took me aside. And then, of course, I said I didn't know who he was.
The Zionist movement was well organized. And we had printing shops where they were printing false documents. We succeeded to print and to distribute thousands of documents to the Jews that were already in ghettos or those that were designated to go to ghettos. Due to my specific training, I was asked by the movement to volunteer to the Nazi youth movement, which was called Levente. It included youth from 13 to 17. And being that I spoke the language, the Hungarian language fluently, and I was blonde with blue eyes, what have you, my commander, my leader, felt that I would be the ideal candidate to penetrate that movement. And I did. And I was given the opportunity of moving around freely with the Nazi uniform. And of course, I took advantage of that, full advantage of that. That enabled me to provide food and shelter in a bunker outside of Budapest, which myself and two others were building to hide some of the Jews. I was arrested actually during that period twice. We didn't cooperate, so the torture continued with various electrical shots and beatings, kickings, and what have you. Fortunately, we still had a few of our people out in the underground that came in presenting themselves as Nazis and requesting or transfer to another jail for further investigation. It worked. They succeeded to get us out. That's where we got liberated.
We stayed on that attic, 7 people. I don't know how we managed. There was very, very little food. No bathrooms, nothing. 7 people. My father was such a dignified man. Can you imagine to go to the bathroom between the children? Then the ghetto ended and they came and they said, we have to go to a factory where they produced bricks. And there was one gentleman, he had a store in town, and he tried to hide, not to come to the brick factory. And they found him, they beat him up, he was bloody. This I'll never forget, I always see this in front of me, the way they beat him up, bloody, then he fell down, that's it. And from there on, they just loaded every day, they brought in the trains and they loaded the people into these trains. And they pulled into Auschwitz. I was still there with my parents and my brothers, 3 brothers I had, and a sister. Right away by the train and we get off, they started to select. My mother came with the two little ones. They were young yet. And they told her to go to the left, and for me and my sister to the right. And my father with my brother, they went away, all of them. I never saw my mother anymore. Neither my father, nothing. Just me and my sister, we were holding on tight. And a cousin, had 3 of us. We stayed together. And then they took us into a block. They called it block. So many people in one shelf, and there was a little bit of straw. And there you couldn't sit there or just lay, but one-sided, like sardines, because there was not enough room. Right across from the crematorium, day and night, you saw the smoke from the chimneys from our block. And one day, a Sunday morning, the couple, the Ruzhenka, she says, we need 1,600, I think 1,600 or 1,800 girls who wants to go by your own will. And I said to my sister and to my cousin, I says, look, let's go because we have a chance, no matter where we go, even to the crematorium, but we have a chance to go together. And they took us, it was called Stutthof. They looked so frightening, that silver, that Verputzte silver, and it was wired in a big camp, and there they gave everybody numbers. I mean, but I always try to avoid that. The Lagerführer came on a loudspeaker. He says everybody should pick up a pair of shoes, and the shoes were wood underneath, cloth on top. No shoes. You know, you couldn't walk in those because we're gonna go to another camp and we're gonna walk for days. This was started the death march. The snow was the bed and the sky was the roof. While we were marching, I saw where the Germans were already fleeing. Families were occupied at the Polish homes, and we heard shooting. From far away, fronts were going on. I said to Ruzhiko and to Elizabeth, I said, maybe we should hide somewhere, stay back, remain. And the Germans, the leaders disappeared. We came to a railroad station, but a very tiny one. We stayed there for about 2 days. There comes on a way a little old man. He could hardly walk with a long pipe. And I figured, well, maybe I should go out and stop him. I talked to him, and he said, and he saw the other 2 kids there, the way we looked. And he says to us, come with me, come with me. This was a miracle, and we followed him. Now we stayed in this house. They allowed us to bathe. They called in a doctor. We had a life there, I'm telling you.
We met my mother in Poland, and I remember thinking, will I recognize her? I hadn't seen her for a year and a half. My father had a sister living in New Jersey, North Jersey, Morristown, and she sponsored us. And so they had an apartment ready for us. So when I started school as a freshman in high school, not knowing the language, I took up French, a French course and a German course, since I spoke both languages. And people would say, well, why would you take French? You speak it, or German. As it turned out, that's why I learned English, because I was studying the vocabulary. I was doing the opposite what the other students were doing. While at Rutgers, there was a young man that I knew who was also in the business school with me, and he mentioned that he had a friend he'd like to introduce me to. Well, Warren called me one summer, and we went out. And 6 months later, we got engaged and we got married. My husband and I have 3 children, and we now have 8 grandchildren. So we're very proud, and I think that Hitler is probably turning over in his grave. While we were living in Pottstown, we would take a day and just take the family, the children, strollers and everything, and we would drive to Atlantic City and walk on the boardwalk, and we enjoyed doing that. And then when my husband retired from his practice in 2001, we actually moved here permanently, and that's why we live here now.
A few weeks after liberation, our management or directors of the movement decided to send a group of people to Bucharest. Our mission was to establish a so-called kibbutz and bringing into this kibbutz, the building, survivors from the concentration camp. Among the people that came back, the youngsters that came back, was one child at the time, 16 years old. Her name was Sarah. She was very frail, and I tried to get her back on her own feet with the help of others. But somehow I had a very special attraction to her, in spite of her looking as she did. Deep down, I saw more than the skeleton. A few months later, I approached her that we should be getting together, as we call it, Chavira. Chavira means friends, and living together and just starting a life of our own. She didn't agree with this idea, and she said, well, she's too young and what have you. She was looking for excuses. But the bottom line is that a few weeks after that, we got married. I felt the obligation and the need, internal need, to make Aliyah, because after the war and prior to the war, that's what we were hoping and living for, making Aliyah, to accomplish our dreams. I joined the army, the Israeli army. My number was 1513, which indicates that I was among the first ones to join the army. I was fortunate to be appointed to work in the labor union, which was the Histadrut, called the woodworkers. After working for a number of years, I made contact with my brother, oldest brother, who lived in the United States already at that time. My first experience in the United States was working actually for my brother. After a few weeks, I saw on the Ed Sullivan show the hula hoop craze. I went downtown first and I saw at Gimbel's a line. People were staying in line. I joined the line. I didn't know why, and then I asked somebody, what are we staying in line for? And I was told for a sale on hula hoops. So I realized that it's a booming thing. In 6 weeks, we were in that business, and I made a good net profit. But instead of retiring, I went to Brazil, which I met some people visiting me in the factory, and just to see what they are all about, what the industry is all about in the houseware field and other fields. That trip resulted in me committing actually to a business in Brazil. I continued that business for 36 years. My 2 sons and my daughter came into the business, and we had about 150 people working in our company. We lived in Philadelphia for 25 years. The first 25 years we were in the States, and for over 25 years we lived in Manhattan. And we bought a place here in Atlantic City 30 years ago, and decided to use this as my retirement.
And we came home, nothing there. A gentle family in the house, certain things I recognized. And there was a carpenter. I says, can you chase out these people? He says to us, now listen to this. He was an old friend. He says, look, you don't stay here and you don't sleep here because they're going to come at night and kill you. And we left, we walked into town. I had a cousin living in a village, my mother's first cousin. And they lived together, he lived together with his brother-in-law. They came home sooner than us. And there comes my cousin, which I knew him, and with him was a handsome, nice, good-looking man. He fell in love with me, we got married. Meanwhile, my husband's brother came back from the war, but he came later on. He was in terrible concentration camp. And he married my sister. In 1948, we came to the United States. We came to Philadelphia, and my husband was brave enough to get a job in a grocery store. We didn't know a word English. No, we came penniless, languageless, nothing. My sister was already for chicken farm. In no time we had 4 or 5 chicken farms because you couldn't make a living from one. So you figured it's never to laugh. And everybody wound up in the chicken farm and they all lost their pets there. And then I said, we're gonna go in business. I look at the paper and there is a guy advertising a wholesale business of produce in the area down the seashore. And we started a business, we paid off everybody in a short time. We traded under the name Schmidt's Fruit and Produce, and if you build up a name, you could make headways.
I feel that the only way to prevent another Holocaust is by teaching our young people, and hopefully that they will learn to be kind and to be not to be racist and to be tolerant of other people, and hopefully that they in turns will teach their children, and so that we will live in a more peaceful world.
I'm looking actually to devote all my time, or most of my time, to try to share with the younger generation, whether Jews or non-Jews, life that could be different than what we went through. And I believe that if you commit and if you decide, you could contribute, you could make a statement, but you gotta believe in yourself, and you gotta believe that there is a mission that you want to fulfill.
You have to be very, very alert. As citizens in the world, everybody, what's going on? You know, who bought which politician, the way they carry on. This was the lesson for the whole world, that one man could create something like that.